scream and holler and tiptoe around a few minutes to get rid of them.
At work,
You got a mental image of that.
No, it's you start recording and the first thing you say is, I have to tiptoe around and scream and holler.
Yeah.
True. Well,
I mean,
this will go with our discussion of mouse balls from last time.
Mouse balls.
Classic.
Yeah, I'm not gonna let Laura ever watch these videos. I'm gonna tell y'all now these are gonna be private on YouTube, okay? So, all right, tonight the first thing we're gonna cover is security. And I was telling the class here face to face before I turned audio on for y'all that stuck in an Exchange server. That's a horrible thing. I was telling the class up here we're not going to do a lot on security because there's not a whole lot on this test about security. You're going to get a few questions, but they're not that big of a deal at all. And the reason is CompTIA has their own complete security certification called Security Plus. So if security is something that you're looking at, that's one to look at later. Especially for any of you folks that work out here, because if you want admin access on a computer, you've got to have it. I think they've officially started that now, haven't they? They're turning you off of admin access if you don't have a Security Plus certification. Yeah, and I think everybody's got to have at least A+. So the beauty of it, it's A+, Net Plus, Security Plus. The higher ones usually cover the lower ones. So if any of you go ahead and get your Security Plus, it'll probably cover you on the other ones. I personally...
Get a certified? Like if I took security, I would get certified on that?
Yeah, there's a Security Plus certification just like the CompTIA one.
Well,
No, you wouldn't.
I mean, it wouldn't give you a certificate.
Okay.
No.
Cover it.
Yeah, it would cover it.
Oh,
So I think it is a pretty good one. I mean, more and more things are on the internet now, so security is one of those things that you really just gotta be aware of. But we're going to talk about file security. We're going to talk about fingerprint readers and biometrics and what that is. That's almost truthfully the extent of the security stuff you're going to see on here. They may give you a list of things and say which one of this is a biometric security device. And they want to know if you can pick out from that typing on a keyboard is not, but you know, a fingerprint reader or an eye scanner is, stuff like that. And then the human aspect, which if you do ever take a security class, you're going to hear this a lot. We talk about security being a chain and the weakest link being the biggest problem. You know, if you think about a chain, that one weak link makes a whole chain weak. Well, unfortunately in security, 99 times out of 100, that weak link is a human. You can be the admin and have the best security you can imagine set up, but if your secretary then tells someone who calls, oh, your password is elephant, well, your security's just been completely defeated by a human element. So the first thing we're going to talk about is operating system security. And the way that is handled in most of the Windows world, which is what most of you will be working with more than anything else, is a user file. And you have these things called objects. And an object represents a user of the computer. It's got their name, their password, and their group membership. It allows you to require authentication for them to log into the computer. I have these in this lab set to automatically log in because I'm not at all worried about security in here. But if I didn't, when you come to the computer, it would say the username is CIT. You'd have to type in a password. Now, of course, out here, y'all all know that's CIT admin. But again, that's because I'm not worried about security. In reality, you'd want a password that's not simple, that everyone doesn't know. You'd want to keep it something that you know. And the basic user types in a Windows system is a user, a guest, and an administrator. User can do basically any of the programs that are on the computer. Normally, only the administrator can install new stuff. And guest is almost always turned off now and never used. But guest is a way that you can set up a computer to allow someone to log in and do things, but then anything they change disappears when you turn it off. The only place I've seen guest used anytime modernly is occasionally you'll find a computer at a hotel lobby that has guest enabled so that if you change stuff when they reboot the machine, it goes back to the way it was. There are different tools for applying security to multiple users, and you can do that with groups. Groups makes it easy so that you don't have to assign rights to every single user on a system. At BIPSI, for example, you have rights based on what your major is that allows you to log into different machines. We don't allow anybody to log in the CIT lab if they're not in one of our majors. So you've got to be in that group for that. Then we have faculty and students. You can be members of multiple groups. Those CIT students are also members of the students group. The students group lets them log in on all the computers in the other labs except for the faculty machine in the front. Only users that are in the faculty or the staff group can log into the computers at the very front of all of the labs over there. So it's just a way of breaking things up and of assigning access. Now at BIPSI they don't, but you could also use this to control access to printers. We generally have an open printer policy up there, which for better or worse, I'm not in charge of security so I don't mess with it, but it does allow for the ease of use of anybody being able to print to any printer, which is nice, but that's also a problem because a student can sit down and print something in your office if they know what they're doing.
Or do it by mistake.
Or do it by mistake, right. They could send it to the wrong lab.
And they say, oh crap, which printer is that?
Right, where did this go? So Active Directory is the Windows way of organizing all of this. It is a management framework. It's made up of domains, forests, and organizational units. And based on how big your company is will be how you design the network. Different places do different things. Some companies use a forest to be the entire company and then separate domains for different groups. This is where really it comes down to your admin's decision on how to set up the network, and there's not a right answer. One company might choose to do domains for people based on job description. Another company may do domains based on location. Like if I'm a big company like IBM, maybe I've got a domain for Austin and a domain for Dallas. Or maybe I've got a domain for programmers and a domain for accountants. It's all up to, your admin as to how you divide that out, and there's not a right answer. Some places choose to not use a forest at all. At BIPSI, we just use a single domain, bpcc.edu. Our forest is also named BPCC, but no one exists in the forest that's not in that domain because, we don't have that many users. Even with the old students still in the system, we probably have less than 25,000 users in the system at BIPSI. And I know that sounds huge when I say it, but to a network, that's really not that many users. Of those, that's a huge number of users maybe, but only probably 2,000 to 3,000 of those are logged in at any one time. Because, classes are going, people are there and leaving, and so, it's all about just figuring out how to do it, but sticking with the scheme once you come up with one.
It's like a hierarchical type.
Yeah, that's why they do it that way. A domain, the forest is the top. And then you can think of it like a tree. Think of a domain as a tree, and your forest is above that, so you can have several trees in that forest. And then you can think of groups as being like branches on the trees. And then you can almost think about your users as being like leaves on those branches. So that's kind of the breakdown of it all.
The OU that is above the group.
Yeah, the OU, yeah, an organizational unit.
Sorry,
Domain
I know
too.
No,
I don't want to go.
You're right, but yeah, do what now?
Forest have several domains?
It can, but the forest will have several domains.
You got them upside down.
Yeah, a forest will have several domains. And yeah, OU, you're right. There's a thing called an organizational unit. And in Active Directory, your OU is basically like a group. That is what you put in that OU are different objects or users. And then you can set security on the OU, and it applies to everything in that OU. Following that, kind of?
Of course, like you said, this probably won't go that deep.
Yeah, I don't even know if the term OU will be on this test, but it's good to know.
Right there on the third thing there. Organizational units.
Is it on there?
On the forest.
Yeah, but this isn't the thing for this
Active
class.
Directory.
This isn't the slide for this test.
So, all right. The other thing you've got to deal with is file security. And what we have is there are two types of file systems that are in use on a Windows machine. There are lots of others, and I may touch on them just so you'll know about them. But the two that you need to know are FAT32 and NTFS. FAT stands for File Allocation Table. That is the old way that things were organized on a disk. NTFS stands for New Technology File System, and that is a much more secure method. But for compatibility, FAT is still something you can use in Windows, and it goes all the way back to kind of the beginnings of DOS. The very first DOS systems in Microsoft used FAT. FAT32 was an extension of the original FAT system, and that's what allows us to have longer file names. You will hear occasionally, you'll hear somebody mention something about 8.3. And what 8.3 specifically refers to is that in the original file allocation table on a Windows machine, a file could only have a file name of 8 characters and the extension, the .doc or whatever, of 3 characters. So you had to come up with a way to name everything on your computer so that all your file names fit what was called the 8.3 rule.
And that's why it's all .doc, .exe,
Those have still fed over from the old days, yes. A .bat file for a batch file. .doc for a Word document. PDF, yeah. Those are all from the 8.3 era. Windows now doesn't care anymore, but in the old days, like, you made sure that all of your file names were named something that 8.3 would fall under. Only NTFS supports security. That's the important thing. FAT, though, is something that's still useful because it's kind of universal. The FAT file system is now an open source standard, even though it was actually originally created for Microsoft use. And I'm not sure, I may be getting wrong on the history. I think Xerox had something to do with the original creation. But because it is open source, other systems can read it. If you go and buy a memory stick from Walmart or Best Buy or whatever, almost all of them are formatted FAT. And the reason there are FAT32, and the reason for that, you can plug that thing into a Linux machine, you can plug it into a Windows machine or a Mac, and they can all read it. If you were to use NTFS, Mac natively can't write to an NTFS system without doing some special stuff, and I won't get into the Mac side of that, but there's a program called MacFuse that allows you to write to it, but it's not part of OS X. You have to do it. Linux, based on what version you're using now, may be able to natively write to it, but originally Linux couldn't either. So they made all this stuff FAT32 so that no matter what the system was, it could write to it.
So all your thumb drives are basically FAT systems.
They are FAT systems.
until you go and format it
Unless you
yourself.
formatted NTFS yourself. So NTFS has a lot of advantages. The disk size can be much larger. It has security. It has compression and encryption. Something missing off this list, the size of the file you put on an NTFS can be larger. And I'll show y'all that in a minute. You can also do disk quotas, and it does have some logging features for recovery. So this is a table of some of the different types of file allocation tables that you could have on a different system. Don't worry about most of these, just make yourself aware of that FAT32 and NTFS. The only other one on here you might occasionally encounter in the Windows world is an EXFAT system. And the only time you would run into that is if you're dealing with a SAN. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say a SAN? What a SAN is? A SAN is a storage attached network. It's a very, very, very large server that has hundreds of hard drives in it. And its sole purpose is to provide data to other servers. And some of those use EXFAT because some of those actually have huge amounts of storage space in them that goes well beyond 2 terabytes. Now it's not on here, but NTFS 6 is the newest version of NTFS.
What's a ZB?
A zettabyte. That's 1 billion terabytes. It's a huge, huge amount of space.
It's like an imaginary amount of space.
Almost, yeah. But they actually have like named all of the different things, and these are the theoretical maximums that there could be. You know, to my knowledge, there's not a drive that's been built that's anywhere near that size. We're only beginning to get into the petabyte stage of things.
That's what, 100 terabytes?
A petabyte's 1,000 terabytes, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Let me look real quick and make sure I'm telling y'all right.
Each one goes up at 1,000.
Getting down to
so-
the molecular
Maybe
structure
1024.
there.
Do what?
Are we getting down to the molecular structure?
We're going the other way. We're talking about huge, huge numbers.
Oh, we're above that. Okay, I'm getting lower there.
We're going higher.
Yeah, we're going higher.
Yeah, it's like God level now.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, is that about be a God storage
Zeus.
drive?
Now you can physically count something that's smaller than an atom.
No, we're going up, not down.
I mean,
We're going in size. You're thinking down. We're talking about going up, like
We're
we
talking
got.
about a warehouse the size of New York.
Here it is,
This
y'all.
would be 0.00001. This would be 1,000. We're going this way.
Here's the numbers. A kilobyte is 10 to the third power. Megabyte is to the 6th, gigabyte to the 9th, terabyte to the 12th, petabyte to the 15th, exabyte's the 18th.
Exabyte.
Yodabyte, I know. Zettabyte is 10 to the 21st. So we're talking about a size of a 1 with 21 zeros behind it of storage.
Store that in something. It's got to be really small. Fit in that.
Oh yeah, I'm not concerned about the hardware though. I'm talking about what it would be.
Because it don't even exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist right now.
I think when I said molecular level, to get that bits in there somewhere.
See, you're thinking, yeah, I see what you're saying now. You're thinking about the hardware of it.
Ions and stuff.
Um,
Store an extra electron or take an extra electron out.
somewhere on here, and I don't remember right off where it is now, but there was a mention about how much space that really is. And I read I think it was on this wiki article. Y'all can look at it later. But basically thinking about a zettabyte, they don't believe that all of the information humanity's ever created is more than 10 zettabytes. Like if you were to take everything we've ever transmitted and everything we've ever had stored anywhere and put it all together, it's still not quite that much information. So we're talking a huge, huge amount.
And is that only electronic information, or is that?
I think it's everything.
We're talking about storing the Library of Congress on a
DVD.
one little deal.
Yeah, I mean you could store it is crazy. And I don't know a lot about it, but I know like storage transmissions and storage media, that's something they're always trying to improve. Solid state, is a step up from hard drives. I have a feeling that before long they'll come up with something else that'll be, tighter data storage, because that is something, as our need for bandwidth continues to grow, our need for storage will continue to grow.
Well, the silicon molecule has 4 electrons, 8 actually. You can take one out, make it a negative ion, or put an extra one in and make it that's how you could store
Right.
zeros actually in the atom.
Or they may even, they could even go beyond that. I think that there's really no telling what they're going to come up
I
with.
mean, good God, look, a damn hard drive used to be. I remember the first hard drive I ever bought was,
Right.
this big. Now I got a thumb drive that has as much storage space as the first external hard drive.
Right. I think I've mentioned to y'all those huge drives at Tech that are sitting in the edge of our storage room because we can't do anything with them, and they're way smaller than what's in these.
The first simulator, a digital one I worked on, had a paper tape below it.
Oh wow. See.
Put the paper tape in there and it runs into a trash can and you wind it up and save it for next time. Not to mention the hollow cards. You guys just missed out on
The cards, yeah. I can't imagine writing a program and having to have it card punched and then.
The flight simulator across from the museum in that building. The source deck is a hollow stack of hollow.
Wow.
We don't use anymore because they got rid of all that updating. But that's what the original source deck.
So So with NTFS, again, like I said, comes the extra permissions. You're able to set more security. Permissions are cumulative, and explicit permissions override inherited. That is a term to make sure you understand inherited permissions. When you think about a directory structure, kind of think of it like a tree. You have like your C drive, that is the root, your root drive. Think about that like a tree trunk. Then you've got all your directories that come off of there. Think about them as being branches off of that main trunk or that main root. When you set a permission on a directory, by default, those permissions are inherited by everything under that directory, whether that be more directories or files or whatever. So permissions are inherited by default. Then you can set what's called an explicit permission, and an explicit permission is not inherited. That means if you're the owner of a directory, for example, but you want to give one file read-only access to everyone under your directory, you can do it with that one file, but those permissions don't go back up the tree, they only go down. So are y'all all kind of following me on that? Permissions are inherited unless they're blocked. By default, they're inherited. Some of the permissions you have in NTFS are modify, read and execute, list the folder contents, read, write, full control, and then special permissions. And each of these do different things, and they do allow absolute control over what happens in each of your directories. I can give somebody write access, for example, but I don't have to give them read access. That means I can create like a Dropbox, kind of like a letter box, if you think about it. You could put a file in it, but you can't read the file you put in it. If I don't give you read access, you can't see what I've done. If I don't give you, I can give you read access, but not execute. Maybe I want to allow you to read something in a directory, but I don't want you to be able to run a program from it. List folder contents. Maybe all I want you to be able to do is see that those files are there. And then, of course, full control is control to all of it. So the way you set these in Windows, go to the Explorer, choose Tools, Folder Options, go to the View tab, clear the simple file sharing, and hit OK. You have to clear simple file sharing because Windows has tried to make it easier for people to be able to share files if it's a home group. You know, most people that are going to share files, if you're a user and you're sharing files, chances are you're at home, because if you're on any sort of business system, they're probably going to have Active Directory set, and they're going to choose what you can share instead of you choosing it. Alright, so something else to be aware of that NTFS supports that FAT doesn't by default is encryption. And encryption is simply scrambling data so that it can't be read without some mathematical function or some key. Public key cryptography uses pairs of keys. And in it you have a public and a private key. One is used to encrypt and one to decrypt. And in Windows, the file system that's encrypted is called the EFS, or the encrypted file system. And that's really all of the encryption you're going to see on this test. Just be aware that it is something you can do. Newer versions of Windows call it BitLocker. If you enable BitLocker encryption, you know, you're able to use that. I prefer a program called TrueCrypt. And TrueCrypt is an open source encryption program.
TrueCrypt, isn't it the one that started out where you could actually partition off a section of your hard drive and lock it away?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I used that one time.
TrueCrypt it's used probably out here in some places too. TrueCrypt has become the standard even though it's open source. And the reason is it's cross-platform. If I encrypt something with my Linux machine, I can hand it to you with a Mac and you can open it because it's a standard. BitLocker is great, but it's Windows only. So if you've BitLockered something, it isn't going to play well with any of the other operating systems.
When you partition off a section of your hard drive, though, and put it as an encryption, does that mess your hard drive up for later use, or is it something you can take off later?
You can take it off, but you're going to lose your data when you take it off. You'd have to back up your stuff that's encrypted to do it.
And
What truly made TrueCrypt the way to go for true security is that it has a very intricate set where you can do a fake petition that has a version of Windows in it that is not what you're really trying to hide. And the reason for that, let's say that you've got a laptop with something that's secure on it, and you need to keep that secure, but I'm standing with a gun at your head. I say, give me the key or I'm going to shoot you in the face. Well, with TrueCrypt, you can set up 2 separate passwords. You type one password and it takes you to what basically you could think of as like a honeypot, a fake but set up operating system on your hard drive with fake information in it. Whatever you have real hidden in the other one, you put fake information in this one. So your adversary thinks they've got what they wanted by getting the fake information from you. But you never typed in the right password to go to where the real data is hidden. So, I mean, that's an intricate setup. You got to install 2 different operating systems on your computer to do all of that. But
I guess it works off 256-bit encryption.
You can use whatever. It'll do any of the different types. 256 bits, nothing anymore, though.
Oh, really?
No.
I'll tell you,
256 is breakable easily.
I'll tell you what's what encryption stuff that's really screwing people up right now is the extortionware.
Oh, is that like the one that pops up that says
FBI.
FBI, give me $50?
I'm saying that.
No, like 500 or more.
Oh, whatever it is, yeah.
But we saw the first version of that like coming out this summer or whatever.
If you're dumb
It
enough to
was-
put your credit card in a computer because the FBI says that you should give them money, I kind of think you deserve to lose the $50.
Hey, man.
But they
Does anybody actually listen to those emails?
You know where they're getting people? This is the sad but truth. A lot of those are coming from porn sites. And they say if you don't, you're going to get a letter in the mail, blah, blah, blah. So user X, who was looking at porn and shouldn't have when his wife was at work, gets that email and says, I better pay this $50 before they mail something, and I have to explain to my wife why I was looking at porn while she was at work. People buy into that. They do.
the scary part of that was it was actually on on one of our clients' file servers.
I'm not surprised. Whoever logged in probably, didn't have file security set, or they were an admin on the server.
No, it was like physically on the server doing it.
Oh.
Where they got the virus.
I know somebody hacked Army Knowledge Online one day, and when you click the login button to go to the login page for AKO, it took you straight to hardcore porn.
Well, and that's the thing, like, you have to think security when you're in charge of some of this stuff. Look at one of the best examples, whitehouse.com. Whitehouse.gov is the White House, but whitehouse.com is a big old porn site.
Now, I think they finally took it off, didn't they?
Did they? I don't
think
know.
they finally
Did it
disabled
finally get disabled?
Last time you checked it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big porn. I am, man. I
Was
love
that 3 o'clock this afternoon?
about 4.
So it wasn't working at 4 o'clock today.
It was always 4.
He checks it every day.
There used to be a process that a domain name, they would expire at midnight on the day that it wasn't paid, and you could make a lot of money in the early days of the internet buying domain names. This happened to McDonald's. Somebody bought McDonald's.com and turned around and sold it back to McDonald's for 15 grand. McDonald's had 2 choices: pay it, or then when somebody goes on the internet to look for McDonald's, they're gonna get another site.
Wait, 15 grand is all he got for it?
15 grand's all he got for it then. It has gone to court now. You can't, there's a grace period now. You can't do what's called domain scalping. So,
What did they say the number one highest paid domain name was?
somebody just online said the link to whitehouse.com is now linked to Homeland
You went and
Security.
checked that, huh?
Yeah, somebody went and checked it after I was talking about it. So, all right, moving on. There are different ways that you can authenticate yourself to a computer. The most common is, of course, a password. Passwords are great. What's a big problem with passwords? You got to remember them. The longer passwords are better, the harder they are to remember. One of the best examples I have of passwords and how humans will break whatever you come up with happened to me at the juvenile court. When I started at the juvenile court, all of the clerks had the same password to log into the system where all the juvenile data was stored. Every single one of them, their password was subpoena. I was not okay with that. This is juvenile data. You got to keep this stuff private. So the first thing I did was went in and set up a good, strong security policy. I made them do a 10-character password with upper and lower and a number in it. You know, and I was so proud of myself. 2 weeks later, I walked back through the clerk's office. All but one clerk had it written down on a Post-it note stuck on the side of their screen. So what did my security do for me? Absolutely nothing. You have to take security and look at who's using your system and find that common ground. They thought that was just too big of a password. So what did I end up doing? I gave them longer passwords, but showed them how to make a sentence out of a password. You know, so that they would have a password not written down, but still a good password. Passwords being a hard thing like that is what made all of these other authentication mechanisms come into being. Biometric devices is one. Commonly, that's, you know, a thumbprint reader. Yes, they are defeatable, but the newer ones are not easily defeatable. Smart cards, that's one that all of you out here are familiar with. These laptops, there's a smart card reader on the side of this laptop.
What's the smart card?
You got one of y'all got one?
Mine with me. It's our ID card. Has a little chip in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have to put that in a device or in the side of a computer to log onto a machine.
And it is very picky. I know with our military ID cards, when I stick it in a computer, I got 2 chances. If you mess up twice,
Right.
Oh, wow.
you're locked.
You got to call comms and get them to reset it.
You got to come back. You got to come here to the ID card place.
Oh, really?
ID card place has to put your ID card in their computer and,
And reset
reset
it?
everything. And then your computer also has to be reset by J6 now out of Baton Rouge.
The other advantage to those, though, is that you can also set the machine to log off when they pull the card out.
Mhm.
And since they're used to needing an ID card for everything, you know, you put it in there, it's sitting there, you think about taking it. I have actually seen some now that are RFID that are proximity cards. So you can log in, you have to touch your computer with it to log in, but you put it back in your pocket. When you get up and walk more than 3 or 4 foot away from it, it'll log you out. They're getting smarter and smarter with this stuff. Key fobs, that's another one. You can set it where you log in using something that looks like a USB key. RSA, that's a big company that does those.
Magnetics. Those have what, like a magnetic strip in them?
A key fob usually is just actually USB. He's got one.
Touch it.
You touch it to,
The Monaco security.
like this one, my laptop's got a little reader for some of those right here. And you just touch it, see where this, I don't know if y'all can see it, see the little symbol there?
Yeah.
You touch it to that
So
symbol.
that's what that is. I got the same computer. This is a computer State gave me too.
Yeah, touch it on there and it'll read it. And then another way is the digital certificate, and we'll talk more about digital certificates. So the authentication process, first you've got to validate the identity. Then you'll know if it's a work group or a domain. If it's just work group login, then you're just going to log into your individual computer. Local computer versus domain, same thing. You're logging into the local computer. So there are a couple of different protocols that are involved in authentication. And I'm not going to go into detail on these because I doubt you'll see any questions on this test on them. But the two are Kerberos and NTLM. NTLM is the old one. NTLM is basically crackable, so you should not use it unless you absolutely have to for some reason. Like you've got an old Windows NT server you can't get rid of. That would be the only reason to use NTLM.
What's Windows 9X?
9X is any of the 9 series, 95, 98, ME,
Gotcha.
all of the old Windows, the 9X series. It's funny because that confuses people because Windows 9X is older than Windows 8.
Yeah.
You know, it's because they used to name them with the number of the year they came out. Kerberos has taken over. Kerberos is an open standard security mechanism. You see it in Windows and in Linux and in Unix. A lot of mainframes use it. And they show here, you can tell these were older slides because they stop at Server 2003. But all of the new ones use it. Windows 7, Windows 8, Any of your Windows servers that are 2000 or newer use Kerberos. Kerberos 5 is the one listed here. They actually are up to Kerberos 6, which just has more security in it. It's increased the number of bits in the security mechanism. So something that you may be called on to do as a NetAdmin is to build a security policy. And in it, you're going to put things like a password policy. Based on what your data is, you need to determine what the password policy should be. If you are just logging in with some, basic accounting information, maybe an 8-character password's fine. If it's something more secure, maybe you need a larger one. Some of the systems out here, I know the system we log into to put grades in for TA is ridiculous. It's 21 characters, and I have to change it every 30 days. Which means, do you really think I can remember a 21-character password every 30 days?
Does it give you the option, or does it make you not have to, the same one can't be used like?
It can't have more than 10 characters that are the same. It's insane. The only way I keep up with that, honestly, I use a password program called KeyPass. And I use a master password that I know that no one else knows, and I store my other passwords in that KeyPass safe. And for that one that I have to do the TA grades in, I just let it generate me a ridiculously long one every time, and I copy and paste it over there every time I have to change it. You also may have an account lockout policy. And that's going to be based on, again, what it is you're trying to protect and what you're worried about. You mentioned out here twice, and the procedure to reset it out here is you've got to go all these places. Y'all are dealing with more with security than other places. If you are, a school, I think ours are set for like 9 attempts before they lock you out. And lockout up there is simply, go down to computing services, show them your ID, and they'll reset it for you. You have to base it off what kind of data it is and what you really need to protect. Decide whether you're going to use an encrypting file system. What IP security are you going to allow? What are you going to block at your firewall? What are you going to let through? So there are different types of hardware that can be used for it, for security. This is an example of an old fingerprint scanner. Biometric in general uses a physical trait. By physical trait, we mean like a fingerprint, or the scan of an eye, the scan of an entire hand. Something that you are is what biometric would involve. Your voice is a biometric trait because it's something that you are. Here's an example of a smart card reader. This is an external one. This one's an older one. They're showing on here RAM of 8K. Those are the older ones. USB or PCMCIA. Lots of places now will buy machines that have them built in. You have to put it in a keyboard, or like these computers, the side of the computer itself to log in. So smart card readers are basically going to usually have the reader, a smart card, and then software that makes it run. They talk about one in here. The course I adapted these from used a program called Identify. And the labs for Identify were to show people how you would enroll a smart card. Before a new smart card can be used, it has to be what's called enrolled. And that's where you associate the smart card with the user inside of your OU in your Active Directory. So here they're just saying that you create the logon certificate and download it to the smart card and set your password. Another term that you'll hear if you go into security a lot is factor authentication. And the idea there is that you should use more than one way to make someone log in. Smart cards, for example, that's great, that's good, but if that's your only login mechanism, all I have to do to log in as you is steal your smart card. Either wait for you to drop it or try to get it from you, pickpocket you, something like that. So the way you make it more powerful is you add a password to that. Now, not only do I have to have your smart card, but I've got to have your password.
Did you see what they said?
Audio died?
Dude.
Back up. Okay. Yikes. Did y'all miss anything, or did y'all hear me talking about smart cards? Alright, if y'all missed anything, I can go back over it at the end. A little, but I'm good. Alright. I am recording this, so if you did miss anything on smart cards, you can go watch it on the video. I'll get them up tonight. Alright, you have to enroll the card, basically. A key fob, one of the examples of these is that you can have a device that creates a rolling number. And I wish I had one of these to show y'all, one of these RSAs. And basically, it's got a clock in it. And its clock is synchronized to the clock on a server. And to log in, you need your username, your password, and the code that's on that key fob at that moment in time. And that has to match the number that shows up on the server. And the rolling code is not random, but it looks random. It uses a very large mathematical algorithm to create a code that's going to change all the time, every 30 or 60 seconds based on what you got it set to. And then the same algorithms run on the server. So if the clocks are the same, the code will match. And that means that you're who you say you are because you've got more than one factor authentication. You have your username, your password, and the physical device, which in that case is the key fob. One thing that has made those become common again, even though they'd kind of fallen out, is there's lots of smartphone software now that will create a rolling code for you on your phone. And most people have these phones with them all the time. You can set Google, for example, to do that for you. So that if you log on a computer you've never logged on before, you have to put the code in that's on your phone before you can get on that computer. Most people don't set that, but it is something, you know, you can toy around with if you want to play with that in Google authentication. I log on to too many computers for that to be useful for me. And if I've logged on to a computer, chances are it's because I left my phone somewhere. So, you know, I'm actually needing to get to something. So, again, topic C, the human aspect of security. That is always the weakest link. And you want to eliminate as much of the human factor as you possibly can in security. Ways to do that: restrict access to physical areas. Your server room, physical access is an important thing that most people forget when they're thinking security. You can have all of the logical security you want and all the big passwords in place, but if your server room's open and I want your data, I'll go physically steal your server. You got to make sure that's locked. That room should be locked all the time, and very few people should have access to it. If you're a bigger company and you've got the money, you actually don't even want key access to it. You want it to have either key fob or RFID or some access that can be logged. Yeah, even a simple, you know, a code mechanism would work. That was one thing that I was lucky at the juvenile court, because we had security anyways. We had most of the doors in the juvenile court, you've got to have a badge to get through. And it's funny, you would learn how to walk around through there. You keep it in your back pocket, and they were RFID, so you got close to it. You know, you'd walk up to a door and kind of do that, and you could open it. But because those were everywhere, I had one of those on my server room, and I was the only person that could get in there. That way, you know, I knew nobody was going to go in my server room, but it was still easy enough for me to get in and out of there anytime I needed to. You might need a process for data destruction. Based off what type of industry you are, there are going to be laws that say how long you have to keep things. In the school, we have to keep grades for a minimum of 7 years. We have to keep everything. We keep it longer than that, backed up to tape. But we have to keep it on site for 7 years. If in 6 years one of you decides you want to dispute your grade in this class, you still have the right to do that. So the school's got to be able to go back and prove, you know, that you made what you said. That's also why we have to print the grade books and sign them. Those physical copies are kept in our academic records office for 6 years or 7 years. After that, they're destroyed. And then a big one now, managing social engineering attacks. That is the way to get into a system now that most people forget about. it is easy to socially engineer someone if you know a little bit about them and you can pull it off. I read a socially engineering attack. I don't think it was here, but it was at an Air Force base. I'd love to know where it actually happened. Where an individual dressed as an exterminator showed up, said, "I'm here to spray a room." They let him in. They let him have access to all kinds of things. Just showed up as a bug man. You know, and it was a suit they had bought from somebody, and then they got an actual exterminator's thing and filled it with water, so they sprayed around in the rooms. I've read of attacks on companies where somebody shows up dressed as the phone man, because they let the phone man in wiring closets without a whole lot of question. You know, you've got little old 60-year-old secretary who is not a computer person. You show up and look the part, guess what? She's probably going to take her master key and let you in. You have to educate the users on that stuff.
Yeah.
And that is the big thing. If you educate your users on that people do this and you should trust no one, then they'll know. Another one, teach your users, you know, that they can't get their password over the phone, especially if it's a true secure installation. Yes, if I lock myself out of the computer at Bipsy, I can call across the hall and they'll give me the password. Should they do that if we were secure? No, not at all. They shouldn't make me go over there.
But, yeah, have you ever heard of Steve Gould?
That name sounds roughly familiar,
He was
but
a guy that pretty much did social engineering kind of stuff. And over the phone, like one of the first things he did was over the phone, got a company to email him the operating system of one of the first cell phones.
wow.
Within about an hour on the phone.
That's
that was worth a lot. And he was, I actually have several programs that were made by him, but he's got to the top of the FBI's most wanted list, and
that's crazy.
ended up working for him.
But it's easy to socially engineer stuff because people just don't know. It's not that they mean to give it away. Little old secretary did not mean for somebody to break into the system. It's that she truly was not educated on that people would do that. So lock your server room. Lock the PCs if you can. Use cameras or motion sensor alarms. If it's a secure area, you don't want anybody in it, put some cameras up. If it's truly, truly secure, put a guard outside the door. You know, if the stuff is that important, pay somebody to stand there and watch it. So the other important part out of this particular chapter is backing up data. And you should always back up your files. I cannot stress this enough. Even as a home user, you probably have stuff you don't want to lose. Back it up. Things happen. I had a hard drive go down last week. For those of you that have had a class with me before, you know I talked about my RAID 0 array to speed my system up. One of those old drives went out. You know, it bit the dust, but I didn't lose anything because I had all my stuff. Yes, I griped and moaned. It took me several hours to rebuild my computer and put all my stuff back on it. But all my important data was backed up to Dropbox, so all I had to do was format it and start over. Went and put a new drive in it, and I'm good to go. So back up anything that's critical. As a person doing this stuff, if you're going to go into the job of fixing people's computers, you should back up what they think is their critical data before you start working on their machine. And the reason is you never know if something's going to happen while you're there, and it may not even be your fault, but if you're working on their machine and their hard drive goes out, even if you're replacing their monitor, you're going to get blamed for it. And your company's going to get blamed for it. And you know, you could get a bad reputation in the industry of trying to fix it. It could just be bad for you. So back up everything you possibly can. All of the new versions of Windows have a utility to back them up built into it. It's very easy to back up any Windows machine. Here they're showing the utility in XP. It's just the backup and restore wizard. My Documents. For most people, just getting the My Documents directory is enough, because if they've stored everything in the default location, their truly critical data is in My Documents. There are two ways you can do backup. Somebody online says yes, end users are the weakest link in any setting. The technology can be amazing and uber secure, but it means absolutely nothing. You're very right, and that's what happens if your users pass out stuff. Then it doesn't matter what kind of machine you set up. So backup, we've got an advanced mode that allows you to pick what files, and the wizard that picks the default. Here they're just showing that again. There are some different types of backups. A copy, a daily, a differential, an incremental, and a normal. A normal backup backs up pretty much everything. Based on what your backup scheme is, and I may be going deeper into this than you're going to see on A+, I just don't remember. You might do one backup like on a weekend that is the entire system. Then during the week, you might make backups that are just things that have changed since you made the last full backup. And then the next weekend will come around and you'll make another full backup. And the reason for that is because doing it that way, it makes the daily backups faster. But the problem is to restore something like, say you've done that and you have to restore the whole system. We answered no less than 30 backup questions on Grandmaster. All right, maybe I need to go into backup a little bit more then. In that situation where you have the tapes that are incremental tapes through the week, to restore something, you may have to go to your full backup and restore it first, then restore Monday's backup, then restore Tuesdays, then restore Wednesdays to get to where your data is now. Because if you just restored the full backup you made, that data would be 3 days old by the time Thursday came around. So y'all following me there? All right, restoring files use the MS Backup utility. If you are a large company, you're probably going to use some sort of specialized system to back up the stuff. Symantec makes a backup system, for example. Over at the juvenile court, I just backed up stuff to another server that was in another building. That was the best backup I could do with what I had there. At LSUS, we use what's called disk to tape. And what that means is there's a server that copies all of the other servers onto it at night. And then from there, that copy is put on tape. And it takes hours and hours to put it onto tape. Tape is still the way to back things up, but it's slow. There's just no way around it. Copying stuff to tape is slow. And we had what was called a little tape robot. And it had 20 tapes in it, and it would back up to one, and when that one was full, it would pull it out and put the next one in. So over the course of 2 or 3 days, our whole backup that was done onto the drive quickly could get put onto the tapes. And then middle of the week, we'd pull those tapes out and we'd put another set in. And then the backup was done again and written to the tape. And we rotated those tapes out weekly and monthly, so that we kept 4 months of tapes, and then once a year, we wrote a yearly set that we put up that we never used again. So we could go back for archive purposes 5 or 6 years and see what was on the system at that point in time. You should, it's keeping up with it all. But, we had to do that. We needed to be sure that we could protect ourselves.
Just imagine how big banks do their stuff.
Right. You also want to do it off-site if possible. You want those tapes to not be there. At LSUS, the data that was faculty data, while we wanted to keep it, it wasn't considered mission critical. That stuff was backed up, and we had a safe in another building that was supposedly fire and waterproof. We never had to test it, luckily. But the tapes went in there. Grades, though, are considered mission critical. Once a month, a tape of grades got sent to Baton Rouge. Ultimately, Baton Rouge sent them to Iron Mountain, where they're stored indefinitely. So, for stuff that's real important, that's something you can do. Back it up and send it somewhere else. It doesn't have to be as intricate as that. BIPSI sends theirs off, but they also, to keep the faculty data, the full backup, since even though BIPSI's got a lot of servers, we're using pretty dense tapes. It's not but, I think, 10 tapes for the whole system. They've got a safety deposit box at a bank, and their way of off-site is simply, once every 2 weeks, go down there, pull the tapes out of the safety deposit box, and put the new ones in. The theory behind that being, yes, we would lose data, but if the whole place were leveled, we'd have a backup from 2 weeks ago. We wouldn't lose that much.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 weeks is still data, but that's manageable, if it makes sense. So you just have to decide what the needs of your own company are for backup. Something that's becoming insanely popular, and these slides don't get into them, but now, online backup. Carbonite. Carbonite's a great one. I helped a friend set up for a plumbing company an online backup. They've only got one server. They're using Carbonite, and it backs that whole server up every night. So if the plumbing company burns to the ground, they've got their data.
One that I found that's really great, and it's really cheap too, is called Crash Plan.
I use Crash Plan on my computers, but I don't do the update to their site. I actually have Crash Plan on the server over here in the corner of this room. So my laptop backs up to that server. And I don't do everything. I just do my documents directory because there's nothing else on here that's really important to me.
But and I've had to use it one time to like get their stuff off, and it was easy. And it's uber secure, and it's really cheap.
Yeah, I knew it was pretty cheap. Carbonite, the business version of Carbonite that they're using, they pay less than $100 a year for it, which for a business, that's, you know, a drop in the hat to have that kind of peace of mind, knowing that your data is somewhere.
So their entire system could crash, and it just logs into that with a new computer.
And it'll copy it back down. The only time that it would take is just bandwidth, you know, based on what kind of connection they had. This friend in particular, like if they were to lose their complete plumbing company over there off of Hahn Avenue, where their office is, she could bring the whole thing back up at her house in Greenwood, but she's got DSL. It would just take, you know, probably 2 days for DSL to download her whole server back off of there. But as soon as it did, she'd be up and running. And you can do individual files quickly. So like what would be the optimum solution if that really happened to her would be get your QuickBook file right now, put that on a computer, and then you're kind of back in business while your actual server restores over the next couple of days. So restoring files, use MS Backup or the third-party utility based off what you backed it up with. The key with backup is test it. Make sure your tapes actually work. Make sure your backup does work the way you intend it to. Part of your disaster recovery plan should be to make sure you do have a way to restore that data. If you're going to, for example, have an off-site place that you're going to keep equipment, in case you have a disaster, make sure you got a tape backup unit over there that's the same one you've got at your main place. Make sure you have a way to read those tapes. Other things, as a net admin, occasionally you should just try to restore a file off a tape. Make sure you can do it. Make sure it does work. There are different ways to schedule backups. Here they show no one answer is the right fit for everyone. You have to just kind of look at your data and determine the best way to do it. Other things that may have to be dealt with are destruction of data. This has become a more important one now for security because so many things have data on them that aren't just computers. I'll tell y'all one that I thought was just the most interesting thing. And I think it was on ABC News. I don't remember exactly where I saw this. But this guy went in and bought a bunch of copy machines from an auction. And they were bigger Xerox copiers, you know, like the industrial size ones. Most of those have a hard drive in them. When you're scanning stuff now, you're not actually scanning it the old analog way to print. It's being digitized and then printed. And he took the hard drive out and ran recovery utilities through it and got all of these images of stuff that had been copied on that copier. In fact, it was essentially, they were written onto it like PDF files. And this one in particular, he just kind of hit the jackpot showing that this could happen. But it was from a financial company. He had credit card statements, he had social security numbers, he had all kinds of things. And that company didn't plan on that data getting out. It just never occurred to anyone there that this copy machine has a hard drive. We've got copy machines at Bipsy that are like that. You know, you copy 20 or 30 pages and then it prints it all at one time. I bet they've all got little hard drives in them that do that. So you've got to have a process to destruct your data before you get rid of a machine.
A hammer.
Maybe, but you know, in other way, if you're going to give the machine away, you might just need software to do it. Think about removable media, paper records especially. You got to be sure that you can, you know, shred those if needed. Somebody online says, "What do you suggest for full backup on a RAID? 500 gigs in a parity array. Anything that will back up properly. 500 gig drives. I would do tape. I would do DAT tape for that. And I'll talk more to you about that later. So based on what the data is you're dealing with will be how you handle it. Oh, the only one that I've used big like that is Symantec. And that's what we had at LSUS before I started. I didn't ever try any other ones.
Backup exec.
Yeah. Yeah, backup exec, exactly. So you're going to have different policies based off what the data is. At LSU S and at BIPSI both, for example, old computers we try to salvage and give to other places. Based on grant money, you end up with departments at a school that have a lot of money and others that don't. So sometimes you want to try to help the other departments out and give them your machines. But you've got to be sure that there's nothing left on it. Or, you know, if you're going to donate them to a school or something. So there are utilities you can download off the internet that will securely wipe a hard drive. And they're cheap or free. A lot of them are open source and free utilities. What we would do at LSUS was that if it was a faculty machine, we would run the program through it and we would write over the drive 3 times. If you actually want to do it to a DoD specification, you write over it 7 times. If you want to go insane, they have one that's called a Gutmann overwrite, and it's 35 times. There would be almost 0 chance of data being able to be recovered off that drive after that amount of trouble. If it was a server we were getting rid of at LSUS, we chose to keep the drives indefinitely because we didn't have a whole lot of servers, so there wasn't that much space to keep those drives. If the server had a drive that went out, we kept the drive indefinitely just because, you know, there could still be data on it. Tapes, when we finally got rid of the old mainframe system over there, they took the tapes and they overwrote the tapes with zeros, and then we sent them over to the industrial shop and they cut them in half with a bandsaw before we threw them away. So, you know, make sure you have a process for that. If you're working in the medical industry, there is going to be a process set for you. HIPAA has very specific guidelines on how you have to destruct the data, how long you got to keep it, and what you got to do with it. HIPAA even goes so far as to tell you what type of shredder you have to use to shred the data.
I like matches.
Do what?
I like
Matches?
No way of putting that back together.
So, you have to think about a security policy. And it should be it should be basically a contract between your employees and your company. Things you're going to put in it are going to be what you are and are not allowing them to do. This becomes important now with the internet being everywhere. Are you going to let your employees play on the internet during the day or not? You know, that's something you've got to decide as a company. And then if you're their network admin, it's going to be your job to enforce the decisions they've made. And that varies widely. Some companies will say, I don't care if the secretary's sitting at her desk playing on Facebook. Other companies will say, I don't want them going to any website ever other than the ones they're supposed to. You have to make, you know, after the company's made that decision, you've got to figure out a way to enforce it. But by having a security policy that spells it out, that is part of what they get as their HR paperwork, then you can't have an employee come back and say, oh, I didn't know that was a policy. Well, here, this date in HR, you signed that you received this employee manual, this policy manual, and it was in there. The fact that you didn't read it's not my problem. You received it. Ways you're going to handle intrusion, and you should regularly update and review that. Also put your physical access restrictions in it, password requirements, consequences of violating the policy. That's a good one. You know, if they're playing on the internet too much, are you going to sack them or are you going to just turn off their internet? and then a security breach plan and a policy update plan.
You're fired.
So social engineering we've talked about. I'm not going to go as much into this, but it's tricks to get users to give you information. Dumpster diving, that's another one. People throw away things. You can learn a whole lot about a person by going through their trash. Trojan horse attachments. If you know somebody likes cats, send the secretary a picture of a kitty cat with a virus in it. You know, things like that. Shoulder surfing is if I look over your shoulder when you type in your password. Maybe I don't get your password, but I can severely limit what I have to brute force. If I know, for example, your password is 6 characters and they were all on the upper row of the keyboard, that really limits down what I have to try to guess your password. In fact, 6 characters, and I knew it was all the upper row of the keyboard, I could probably guess that in a day or less, because I've limited what I have to try. Other malicious software, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, they put spam on here. Junk email is something, unfortunately, we just have to live with these days. Thank God for Google's junk spam filter. It's insane. I probably get 1,300 or more a day of junk email that is filtered out because of, in my spam file. Spyware, adware, and grayware. Spyware is set up where they're trying to, catch you with passwords. Adware is where you get all of these pop-ups from, different sites trying to get you to buy things. And then grayware is usually kind of in the middle. It's grayware can be a bit of adware or a bit of a virus or a worm or a horse built together.
Malware is just any of those.
Right. So prevention, training. That's the way. Make sure all your computers have antivirus on them too. Then talk to your users. Tell your users not to open email, Tell your users in a training that you're never going to send them an email asking for their password. That, unfortunately, happens to Bipsy a lot. Occasionally, an email will get through our spam filter. It says, I'm the admin, I need your email and password. We're rebuilding the system. Inevitably, a liberal arts instructor gives them their password, and then Bipsy gets blacklisted from email for 2 weeks because over a break, our computer sent out 20 million spam emails. Allegedly. That may be something that happens on a regular basis. But what would prevent that? Getting every faculty and staff member together up there and having an email training session saying, please don't do this, and then going further with that, putting some kind of punishment in place. If a user does this, this is what's going to happen to you. If you're going to, if you give your username and password out to one of these, we're going to turn your email off. Something like that.
Yeah,
I think Mike is drinking tonight. While he's doing that. Yeah, whatever.
So, network-wise, you need to have a firewall. Does everybody know what the purpose of a firewall is?
To make fire.
To stop fires, really. A firewall is a preventative measure. Your network goes into it. Usually it's the first line of defense. And it blocks things based off of services. And in a general firewall setup, what you do is you block everything and then only allow the things you need in. So you start with a policy that says block everything, and then you put rules in it above that that say allow this specific, allow this specific. Like here, I've got the firewall pretty blocked down. All I allow in is port 22, which is SSH, so I can get into my server remotely, and then 80 to get into the web server. There's no need for anything else open out here, so everything else is blocked. So that is a quick rundown on security. Are there any questions? Chapter 11 is all about printing. And there is a significant portion of the A+ about printing. They want you to understand how a laser printer works and why a laser printer works. And specifically where you're going to see questions about this is going to be in the second section on scenarios. There were 2 or 3 questions on mine where they said this is the printer output, what part didn't work? And like specifically with my question that I remember on it, the page came out, but as soon as I touched the ink on the page, it smudged. So from that, what they were wanting me to deduce was that the fuser was out. So it hadn't fused the print to the paper. And we'll talk about the other types of printers. Inkjets are pretty popular these days too. Because they're cheaper to buy, they're a little more expensive to maintain, but this test doesn't have it, but I look for them to add a bunch about color lasers on the next one, because color lasers are cheap for home use now. My old printer finally bit the dust at home. I had an old LaserJet 5 that I'd had forever. And yeah, you know the one you put the paper in the top? Yeah, I had to get a USB.
For that.
You can still buy the ink for the thing.
Well, that's the one that
You
print
can still buy it. No, it was pretty slow, but
Today at work we were going through the whole junk to get rid of them. Here's the LaserJet 4 and the LaserJet 5.
I don't print a lot at home though, so you know, because if I really need to print something, I've got a high speed there. There's one in my office. There's one in all the labs. But it finally bit the dust, so I gave in and bought a printer. But I spent $108 at Best Buy and got a color laser. I mean, they're cheap. It's cheaper to do that than to really get a good inkjet. So now the trade-off is inking that thing's going to be expensive. My actual plan, and this was the one rule I had when I looked for a printer, I wanted to find one that would function without the color ink in it. Because when I finally run out of color ink in the thing, I probably won't replace it. I'll just put a black cartridge in it. We've got a big color laser at the office at Bipsy. If I need to print something in color, a lot of it, I'm going to go up there and print it. So, you know, mainly I just needed it to print little things here and there that I do at the house. So in printing, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of lasers, inkjet, impact, and thermal printers. We're going to talk about printer and scanner controls and the firmware, the print process, the types of interfaces, printer installation, and optimizing printer performance. Finally, we'll talk about configuring printer upgrades and troubleshooting. So, the print device is the hardware that controls the ink flow. Print devices can be locally attached, connect to the network, or shared by another computer. The printer is the software that tells the hardware how to work. It is usually OS dependent. They refer to the printer as being the driver. I would call it the driver. The spooler is a temporary storage for documents. It's usually found on the hard drive, but with newer higher-end printers, they may have their own RAM or their own hard drive in them that will actually take data in to queue it before it prints.
So the print device is what any normal person would call a printer?
Yes, the print device is what any normal person would call a printer.
Like the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And then the queue is a system folder that saves jobs until the device is ready. They go in the queue feeds them to the spooler ultimately feeds them to the print device. The queue is always on your local machine. Sometimes that spooler is on the printer itself. So they go to the queue feeds them to the spooler, and then the spooler actually prints them, sends them to the printer to be printed. So the types of printers, laser and LED, they use light arrays to create images of toner ink for toner to adhere to. Inkjet uses nozzles to spray ink onto the page. Thermal printers use heat-sensitive paper to transfer the image. And then impact printers actually use a moving part that impacts ink on a ribbon that then prints.
Yeah, typewriter.
Right. And you know, let me tell you, those old printers that do that, as impact printers, are still in use in a lot of places. And I'm jumping ahead, but let's just ask, can any of you guess why those impact printers might still be used somewhere? Security's one, but what else? What do lots of businesses still use?
Like the receipt type paper?
Printing invoices and you get the carbon copy.
The carbon copy, you just hit it. All of the new printer technologies are great and fast, but they cannot, because they don't physically impact anything, they can't do a carbon copy. If you go buy a car, even still today, When they print your actual loan documents, they do it in carbon copy. They've got an inkjet, an impact printer that they're going to feed that through an old dot matrix, and it's going to print everything on their form for you to sign. So that is why those printers are they're still being manufactured. That used to be the cheapest type of printer. Now they're $500 or $600 because they're not easily findable.
There's a need for it.
There's a need for it.
We still use those 8-inch floppies.
For that still reason, there's a need for it.
We got one company that makes services the drives and makes the disc on request.
I bet those discs are
Oh, they're-
$15, $20 a piece now, aren't they?
These, like to go in, or those, Sony doesn't even make them anymore.
Make what?
The actual floppy disks.
Oh, really?
Like Sony quit making them 3 to 5 years ago.
So your printer, if it's a laser or an LED, it's similar to a photocopier. They use an electrostatically charged drum to receive the image. A powdered toner can be heated to create a permanent image. Roller-based paths for the paper to go through the print process. The difference, and this is talking about old copiers now. I need to let you know most new copiers are digital. They do still make analog copiers, but not many. I've not seen an actual analog copier in a very long time now. But that was the original difference. A PC laser printer is digital and a copier is analog. The computer print driver controls the output on a printer versus a copier being independent of a PC and using a scanner to copy the image. Laser printers use higher temperature than copiers. That's not so much true anymore either. LED and lasers use the same imaging process, just different light sources. And you'll see that if you get out there in business and you're at a medium or a large business, the lines between a copier and a printer and a scanner are kind of blurred. All of these new copiers that Xerox and the other companies make have a USB interface and a network interface on them, and you can use that copier as a scanner or as a printer. So it's kind of an all-in-one thing. And it makes sense because that way, you know, they're selling you one device. And as a company, you've just got one device to keep up with. And the print load on some of these is, you know, several thousand pages a day, so you're not gonna overload it. So laser printers have basic fonts that are built into the printer. The printer has a limited amount of memory, and graphics require extra memory to feed data to the print process. If a print job requires more memory than the print device can process, the job might stall or print very slowly. So the solution is to add more RAM to the printer. Now most modern printers are not going to need that because they're already going to have quite a bit of RAM in them. I know in the old LaserJet 5 I was telling y'all I finally got rid of, I did add memory to it. Memory for it came on a little card that went in the side of it. And I did that because if you printed something, it would either print half of it and stop if you used anything above 600 DPI, or it wouldn't print at all. The printer just couldn't handle it. So the solution is to, if you can add memory, is to reduce the size of the images or to reduce the resolution of the print job. So toner cartridges contain the plastic powder that melts when heated that actually puts the image on a piece of paper. 80% of the problem with laser printers can be fixed by replacing the cartridge. Anytime I had to work on a printer at the juvenile court, that was almost always the first thing I did. If it was printing kind of wonky or printing with lines on it or something like that, the first thing I'd do is go get a new toner cartridge and see if, you know, replacing that toner cartridge would fix it. And a whole lot of the time it would. The cartridges are light sensitive. They need to be kept in a dark place and unopened until you're ready to use them. 80% of the printing process actually takes place inside the cartridge. Use paper that is made for a laser printer. This especially applies to labels and envelopes. I cannot tell you what a pain it is to go help somebody, you know, like a secretary at the juvenile court, when they bought some lasers and some labels and tried to print labels for a mailing, and they bought inkjet labels instead of printer labels, instead of laser labels. They fed those through the printer, and inkjet doesn't need to be heat sensitive. So those labels come off in the middle of the printer and get stuck on every little roller inside of the printer. Yeah, it's almost impossible to fix, but that's why you got to make sure that what you buy is for that printer. Now here's the trick. You can use laser labels on an inkjet. You can't use inkjet labels on a laser. And the reason is that heat. They need to be able to handle the heat. With an envelope, if you're not careful, if you get envelopes that are just for inkjet and you feed the envelope through your printer might seal it shut because it'll melt the glue before you can put the letter in it.
That's pretty cool.
Transparency stock is a special one. If you're going to print on a transparency on an inkjet, you've got to have a special type of transparency. If you use a normal one, the way that inkjet works is the ink has to soak into the paper. Pardon me, the ink can't soak into a transparency, so it just sits there and evaporates off. And after you've printed a page, it'll just disappear. So inkjet printers are also called ink dispersion printers. They are popular with small businesses and residentials. They use tightly spaced nozzles to spray ink onto the paper. Might have 180 nozzles just for black ink. They have more than that now. They require realignment of the print head after changing the ink cartridge, and that's done with the software. Most of the modern printers do that automatically for you. When you change the cartridge, they'll print a sheet, and the little screen will come up and say, pick the line that was the straightest. And that's realigning the cartridge. If you've got one of these combo printer scanner ones, some of them you print the page and then it tells you to put the page on the scanner. The printer itself scans the page and decides which one's the best.
That would mine.
Yeah, a lot of the new ones are like that. The ink cartridges may come in several colors or they may come in black. And there are two different sets of colors that you may have with one of these printers. The older ones used RGB colors, had a red, a green, and a blue. A lot of them now use CMYK colors, which is just 4 different colors. K is black, cyan, magenta, and yellow, I think, are the 3 colors. As a colorblind person, I can't tell the difference in what's printed on one or another. But people tell me that for, especially for photo printing and stuff, the CMYK provides a better, a more color depth image and things. And if you get one of these bigger, more business industrial inkjet printers, they might actually have 6 colors on them. Some of them will have one set for normal printing and then a whole nother set for photo printing. And, all of those are in there and the printer picks the one it needs. So here they're showing an example of where the ink is in a printer.
Wow.
See, this one's got several different ones in it.
Black, blue, white, red, pink, yellow.
It's probably
That's
like
light blue.
Right.
You got a light blue, dark blue, you got a
pink
dark
and a red.
cyan, and a light one, and then you got a yellow. We got the one, the 02, the Photo Smart, and we got the new one. It has black in it. It has black, small black that goes with the colors, and it's got a big black that does.
Black and white printing.
Okay.
And now, one thing they have finally started doing too. In the old days, one thing I hated about the first color inkjets was that you had one color cartridge and one black and white cartridge. So if one of your colors ran out, you had to throw the whole cartridge away. On the old RGB ones, the old HP, like 500 series inkjets, that's one of the first ones I remember using. Yeah, you ran out of red, well, you might have not printed anything on the other colors, but you had to replace that whole cartridge because it was one cartridge. There's a website, I'm not going to go to it, but if y'all ever just need some entertainment, go look. And the whole idea of it is, we bitch about the price of gas. You can go to this site and it tells you what you pay per gallon of some other things. Like if you buy a gallon of NyQuil, it's like $500. Well, one of the most expensive things on there is ink.
Oh, yeah.
Ink comes out to like $6,000 a gallon.
What's this website?
I don't remember it, but I'll see if I can find it. Because it's kind of neat. It's got like 20 or 30 different things on it that you can find out about. But Alright, so inkjet printers, the paper is pulled into position by a roller. The print head moves across the paper, and the ink is dropped down on it. At the end of the line, the media is advanced and the print head reverses direction and continues to print. And after it finishes, the page pops completely out. Inkjet printers work because that ink has got alcohol in it. And as soon as it hits the page, the alcohol evaporates and the ink drops down into the paper. And that's what makes the images. So inkjet maintenance, the cartridges and the nozzles can become clogged. Most have a self-print feature. They say use warm, shallow water to soak the tips of the nozzles. I'll tell you what I've done in the past when I've had an inkjet that's messed up. Take the print head completely off and put it in a little rubbing alcohol and rub it around for a minute. And then take it out, and that rubbing alcohol will evaporate a lot quicker than the water. Use the printer power button to shut down the printer. That's important. Earlier I said, that the inkjet printers use alcohol. There is a special place on the side of the printer that the print heads need to go to keep that ink from evaporating. If you just turn your printer off with the print head sitting in the middle of the page, over about a week or two, all your ink will evaporate away. So you want to make sure you turn it off using that power button on the printer, because it'll move it back over to the right spot before it turns itself off. If they come misaligned, which does happen, use the alignment feature. That's important with color printing, because to make all the different colors, it's got to drop ink and then move a tiny bit and drop more ink to mix the colors. So if your printer comes out and it doesn't look good, you can realign it. You can refill print cartridges. I personally suggest against this because it's a pain to do, and you can buy generic cartridges that are a lot cheaper than the originals. Usually also, if you refill the cartridge and your printer has a problem, you've invalidated your warranty. I know that's ridiculous, but that's how it is. They make you use the manufacturer's cartridges to make the warranty valid. If you buy an HP printer, you got to use HP cartridges till your warranty expires, or you've invalidated it. If you do want to refill them, they sell the kits to do it. I just find that it's easier personally to... somebody posted the site I was talking about. I find it a lot easier, other than that, to just buy generic ones off the internet. And if you've got a printer and you're going to keep it a while, you can buy them in like 2 and 3 packs, and they're cheaper. As long as you don't open them, the ink stays good in them. It's when you open them that they start getting exposed to air that the alcohol will evaporate. So thermal printers are another type. We have a thermal printer, a direct thermal, and a dye sublimation printer. These are mostly used nowadays in checkout machines that print receipts. Any of you have gone to Chili's or anywhere like that and eaten lately, that printout they give you, the paper feels kind of weird, that's a thermal printer. The idea behind those is you never have to change the ink because the image is actually burned onto the paper. But you have to use a special paper that will do that.
I worked at Pizza Hut and we used those, and every once in a while, if we had on a really hot day, the receipt would, if we left it like on the box and put it in the bag,
it would.
By the time we got to the door, you could
black.
hardly read it.
Yeah, I can believe that. I've never done that, but just to play around with one, I've taken one and run an iron over it, and you can black the whole thing off pretty quickly.
Also, like the frosted tape, or any tape, but I was a union trader, we had to keep all receipts, and we tape them onto a page. And if you tape over anything on the receipt, it'll be gone in an hour.
Huh, I didn't know that.
So, and also, if you want to keep a receipt for a long time, make a copy of it.
Right. That makes sense. I didn't know the tape would do that, but...
Yeah, I mean, it will go away right away.
Huh.
But especially that frosted tape, the nice stuff.
Yeah.
Put that over there.
I'm going to have to try that now. That'll be a fun little experiment.
Right. Some people think I want to tape it all up so it'll be preserved.
But it doesn't preserve it. So, old fax machines use these too. Any of the old fax machines you had to put a roll of paper in, that was thermal. So it's important you use the right paper with a thermal printer. Another type of printer, this is what I was talking about earlier, the impact printer. And another name for an impact printer is a dot matrix printer. I've still got several of these laying around. I really ought to get on eBay and sell them now because they're, you know, they're kind of expensive these days because not as many people make them.
That's the most famous one was the Daisy Wheel.
Yeah, that IBM's Daisy Wheel printer.
That one had knobs on the side.
Yeah, the impact printer or a dot matrix has got knobs, and they pull the paper that's usually fan fold. It's all together, and that's what the purpose of the sides were. The paper would actually roll through the printer on those sides. I've got some from doing some stuff at International Paper there in Spring Hill. The scale house, that's where my dad worked. They used those, and the reason, A, they printed little cards every time a truck came in and out, and B, those old dot matrix printers were almost indestructible. I mean, you really had to work to kill one of them. I remember they would get so dirty out there, they would take their shop vac and vacuum the printer out, and the thing would just keep on running. You really couldn't kill them. 9-pin and 24-pin were the common ones. 9-pin is draft mode, and it used 9 pins to make the letter. 24-pin ones were near letter quality. They used 24 pins to make the letters. And these print heads would become hot to the touch. These are fast printers, though, too. That print head would move across pretty quickly. Some of the later ones they made, yeah, they don't make things like they used to. Some of the higher quality or higher speed dot matrix printers actually had 3 print heads, and they printed 3 lines at a time. So they would print, you know, you could print a whole page in 30 seconds or less, which was real fast for the time. I mean, you know, that's not so much anymore, but...
The old line printers where you actually had people catching the paper coming out so fast, a band around it.
Right, yeah, that was another type of printer, a band printer. And to my, I'm sure they did. I never saw a band printer that used the 8.5 by 11 paper. All of the band printers I ever saw used the wide paper that you used to hear people call computer paper. And it, not always, but normally it had like blue and green bands across it. And the sides of it didn't normally come off. And the reason they didn't come off, those printers were so fast, they made that paper at one time, they would come off, but the printers would tear the sides off the paper. They would shoot it through so quick.
And actually had paid people to stand there and catch the paper and keep it.
Yeah, it would come out so fast it wouldn't fold back upright. So those were the fastest printers of the time, and they were pretty expensive too. All right, so your printer itself is going to have firmware. That's going to be the built into the printer. Software is going to be what feeds it. Windows supplies the printer subsystem for most printers, but you may need to load drivers if your printer does more things. Like if it has specific features, you might need the driver from the manufacturer for that. A good example, a lot of these printers that are printer scanner copiers, Windows by default, when you plug it in, can print to it, but you need the driver if you're going to scan from it or any of the extra stuff. So the print process itself is that an application sends a print request to Windows. Windows uses the print queue to manage the job. When ready, the printing device receives a stream of data from the computer. The data stream commands select the orientation and the built-in font. If the driver is appropriate for the printer, it prints correctly. If you're using the wrong driver, a pretty good indication is you get a stream of garbage that's printed out. The printer feeds the page and prepares to print from the top. When it's complete, the paper is ejected and it starts on the next page of a multi-page document. So the process for a laser printer is a 6-step process. And the way they say to remember it is Carol cleans windows during thunderstorms furiously. You start with cleaning. The excess toner is cleaned from the drum and the charge is discharged. Then conditioning. The drum is conditioned. The page is written to the drum, and then the image is developed on the drum with the toner. And then the image is transferred to the paper from the drum. And then finally it's fused. The fusing is the hot process where it's actually melted onto the paper, and then it comes out of the printer. So it's cleaning, conditioning, writing, developing, transferring, and fusing. And chances are high you're going to get a question about the laser print process on your test.
Yeah, I had one here.
Everybody else that's taken it that I've asked has said they had at least one question on it. Here they're just kind of showing you the process. Different printers take paper in different ways, you know, and this is just kind of a generic one to show you. Some printers have got a tray in the back, some don't.
Did you see what the guy said?
I had this exact question today. Alright, so the interface on the printer itself. Most are going to be USB or network now. Parallel, they want you to know about. I meant to grab that cable. I need to do that for y'all next week before we are done for good. I have a parallel printer cable. My old HP5 that I was telling y'all about was actually parallel. And I had a USB to parallel cable so I could plug the thing in, because I didn't have anything with a parallel printer port on it anymore. Some might be RS-232. You're not going to see that. Unless you work in a very, very high-end print shop, you're not going to see a SCSI printer ever. Bluetooth, now you might see that. A lot of these newer printers have Bluetooth on them so that people can print to them from their phones. Infrared, not so much anymore either, but it was an option on some of the old printers. Ethernet, now that's pretty common these days, especially since more and more people have more than one computer at home. You get a printer with Ethernet and you can share the printer on the network without it having to be hooked to a single computer. Lots of places now, or lots of printers, do wireless as well, because so many people have wireless networks and a lot of home users rarely print. So by doing wireless, you can put your printer in a closet somewhere out of the way, and as long as it's in wireless signal, you know, you can print to it when you need to.
How well do the wireless printers work?
Pretty well.
I've only used one. We have one wireless inkjet that we got before we got the color lasers at Bipsy. And it was fine. The way it worked, it just acted like it was actually a network device. It got an IP address off the wireless network, and we just printed to it that way like any other printer.
I've set up a couple, and the first one took a little figuring out to make sure it was all the way on the network, but after that, they're pretty easy.
And then you might run into a Firewire printer. Again, probably not common, but it's a possibility. Alright, so printers have several options. You have general, where you can print a test page. Sharing allows you to share it over the network. Ports will show paths to the printer. Advanced, you can schedule the availability of a printer. This gets into where you can set a lot of things that a lot of places don't use, but it's there for you. You can, like if you have a printer that's in a secure area that says only open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can make that printer unavailable from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. That way no one can print to it because, you know, they can't get to it. Security, you can decide what users can and can't print. There are also settings for what tray they're going to use, what kind of memory the printer has, any font cartridges it may have, and then if it's a color printer, you'll have a color management page. Normally you don't change any of those settings unless you're doing something with like a bigger business. I know that like in the open labs at Northwestern, we had one printer for the whole lab, and it had 2 trays in it, and one tray had blue paper in it and one had normal. And as a student, you were allotted 150 pages a semester free. After that, you had to go pay to buy new print time, and the school provided the ink and all for those printers in the general labs. And the blue paper was specifically to separate print jobs. So when you printed something, a cover page came out on the blue paper, and then your print job behind it. So the student worker, you know, with one printer and 60 or 70 computers, it was printing a lot. The student worker would get it by, you know, get the printer jobs out, and he knew those blue sheets of paper were the dividing. So you'd go up to pick up your print job, and you knew your stuff was behind that blue.
I would always get up there whenever somebody decided to print their textbook,
Right,
and I was 5 minutes late for class.
right. That's how it always happened. Everybody's waited until last minute, and we're either out of ink or, somebody has printed 400 copies of something. Or worse, they've printed, and before we had it where it would check to see if they had enough job time left, they'd print it and it'd get halfway through it and their job would stop because they ran out of money for paper. So they've got to go pay to get the rest of their job out. Here's just an example of where what the printer properties look like in Windows. There are two sources of paper. Make sure the right one is selected. If your printer supports two, not all do. Some have more than two. Some have more than one output tray too. Make sure that's the right one for what you want. This print spooler should be set to automatic in most cases. So the troubleshooting process for a printer is not that much different from other ones. Identify the problem, establish a cause, test the theory, establish a plan of action, verify functionality, and document the problem. Sometimes you need to remove a printer. You can't simply delete it from the printers folder. The reason is that may not delete the driver or the spooler. So use the add remove hardware feature. The reason you want to do that is so that it won't keep all those other print jobs that have never printed taking up space on your hard drive. If you just go to the printer and hit delete, it will delete the printer. It'll work fine. It won't cause you any trouble. But if there were print jobs sitting there waiting to be printed, they're going to sit there indefinitely because now there's print jobs in a queue that are not linked to anything. They're just going to be sitting there on your hard drive.
Waste is waste.
Exactly.
Really
So,
easy to see?
do what now?
Really easy to recognize?
Once you delete the printer, no. You'd have to go into your temporary files on your computer and see if you couldn't find them from there.
You can always just delete the temporary files.
Yeah, you can just delete all the temporary files and reboot your machine and it not hurt much of anything.
Actually, whenever somebody says they've got a slow machine, that is the first thing I do is delete all their temporary
Delete
files.
the temporary files. So that is pretty much a quick rundown of printing. Do y'all have any questions? All right. All right, so chapter 12 is going to be on storage devices. We're going to talk about some of the types of storage. Remember, y'all are taking the 2009 exam, so y'all have got a little bit of old stuff on here, like iOmega zip drives, Jazz drives, some stuff like that, that were still in use but really aren't anymore. We're going to talk about tape drives and external hard drives. We'll talk about flash memory card readers, USB flash, and we'll talk about how to troubleshoot some storage. All right, so the principles of storage are that data storage uses some sort of file table. No matter whether you're FAT or NTFS, or if we look at other types of ways that files are stored on Linux, like with EX or any of those, it all uses the same principle of that it is some sort of table that goes to show what the files on the drive are. Storage might be internal or external, or it could be accessed remotely. Based on how your system is and what kind of bandwidth you have, the storage doesn't actually have to be in your local area. And storage does become unreliable. That's why redundancy is essential. With the exception of solid state stuff, all storage is stored on some moving part, and moving parts eventually break down. So, floppy drives. Yes, they are still in use. No, not really.
Actually, at this point, they were, if it was 2009,
Right.
they were just, like, that was, like, I think 2010 was when Sony actually...
That was near the end of the era of the floppy. If I do agree with some of this slide, though. The most common still around that you may see it all is the 1.44 megabyte, which is the 3.5-inch floppy. They connect to the motherboard with a 34-pin cable. The cable has a red twist. The stripe on the side of the cable is pin 1. I've said this before, this is one of the only cables in a computer that you can plug in backwards, the floppy cable. And a very clear indication you've done that, if you plug that cable in backwards, the floppy drive light will light up and stay solid. Normally the light on front of a floppy only comes on when a floppy's reading or writing. If that light comes on and stays solid, you probably got that cable on backwards. They're powered with a 4-wire miniature jack. A floppy itself has a slider, and the slider can protect it from accidental erasure. And the way that works is you've got a little light and a sensor, and if it can read light through it, then it allows you to write to it. And if it can't read light through there because you've slid that little slider over and broke the path of light, it won't write to it. On the old 5 1/4s, that was handled with a notch on the side of it. If there was a notch and the light shot through the notch, and if the light went through and went from the reader to the detector, you could write to the disk. The way you fixed it then was a piece of little black tape. You cut a piece of black tape and put over the hole, and that made your disk write protected after you'd written to it. Floppies have largely been replaced by USB or other media. These little USB sticks are cheap. Everybody's got them. Now something even competing with those. Portable hard drives are cheap and small and easy to use. Alright, so the hard disk drive is inside of the computer. It's used to store the operating system. It's made by several little things that are called platties. And those platties are little metal oxide platters that spin. And the coating is magnetically charged to create little areas that you store data in, and that's called fluxes. And the mark of the flux makes it a binary 1 or a 0. Remember, computers, that's all they do. Down at the bottom, it's either a 0 or a 1. All this great stuff we do boils down to binary, and that's how it's stored. The platters are divided into tracks, and the tracks are the circles, and each circle is divided into sectors. And they say think of a sector as being like a piece of a pie. Each sector holds about 512 bytes of data, which is 4,096 fluxes. Sectors times tracks times 512 will give you the capacity of a drive. And the two types of drives that are commonly in use now are PATA and SATA. PATA is also called IDE. I never use the term PATA except when I'm teaching this class, because that is a name for it. But I always refer to that as IDE. So if I say what type of drive does your machine have, I'm looking for the answer IDE or SATA.
Was IDE like the original name, or how does that go?
I don't honestly know. I just know that like old computers used MFM. And that was back, like we're talking MFM in the era when you couldn't have a 40 megabyte petition because DOS couldn't read it. It was too big. That interface that had the little ribbon cable that didn't have pins on the end, but you had to slide it onto these little pins. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? I wish I had one of those to show y'all. That was called an MFM connection. And then from there, I always heard IDE, and it was IDE until SATA. So I don't know if those were actually both the same, you know, if PATA and IDE were always the same or not. PATA stands for, well, here's our answer, Parallel Advanced Technology. It's derived from IDE, Integrated Drive Electronics. Data bits are sent in parallel using a 40-pin ribbon cable. Drive jumper positions determine the roll. Roll is something that was important with IDE drives because each cable supported 2 drives. And the position of the drive determined where the drive would show up on the computer, whether it was C drive or D drive. You had a master drive and a slave drive. The master drive needed to be on the end of the cable, the slave in the middle, and you had jumpers that you had to set to tell the computer or to tell the drive where it was on the cable. Then they added one called cable select, and that was later on. And cable select, it would figure out where it was, but you had to make sure that you were using the same one. If you used cable select, both your drives had to be cable select. If you had a drive that didn't have that, you had to do master slave. And they use a 5-pin Molex connector for power. Serial ATA uses an L-shaped cable. The data is carried over 7 wires, and there is no sharing. There's no longer jumpers because each SATA port has just one drive on it. So there's no jumper blocks. Have all of y'all seen a SATA cable?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen one? Let me see if I've got one over here. That I may actually have.
There's some right there.
I don't have a cable, but I can show y'all what it would look like.
We can always just open one of these up.
Send this around. This is where the SATA would plug in, and the data is on the small connector on the back of that, and the the small one's the power, and the larger one was the actual data cable.
These have SATAs in them.
Yeah, because these drives in the front are SATA.
Well, no, I mean, I know this machine. They all the motherboards or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. My front drives are plugged into the SATA port. SATA is faster, and that's why SATA has taken off.
And they're smaller.
Yeah, the connections are smaller. One problem with computers is that if you've got all these attachments in it, you got wires running everywhere, and you end up with a huge mess inside. So anything to make the cable smaller is usually a good thing. Here they're showing you just the cables. A SATA data cable and power cable over on the end. Then an IDE power cable and a data cable. And you'll notice that the SATA cable, that little L makes it where it'll only plug in one way. And the IDE cable's got that little key on it so that it'll only plug in one way. There are actually 2 keys on the IDE cable. If you look at the top, there's the key to keep you from plugging it in wrong. But then if you look, one of the pins is missing. So that keeps you from plugging it in wrong as well.
Did you ever cut the IDE ribbon cable with the razor blade and tie it together to make it smaller? You know?
No, I never did one of those. Did you ever try it?
Yeah, I used to do that. Something like, try to
Make more space.
Better airflow.
Wait, what did you do?
You can take a razor and each of these little individual pieces of that ribbon cable, you slit it, and then you take a twist tie and twist it together.
You make, take it less for air.
They finally got smart and started selling cables like
yeah,
that.
They started to sell them.
So you'd have a round cable instead of a
You'd have a round cable instead of one like that.
Big flat one did.
And then PATA and SATA power, the power requirements are the same. So if you've got a computer that you've run out of SATA power cables in, it's very easy to get an adapter that'll plug into this Molex connector that IDE uses and comes out to a SATA power cable. So hard drive installation. You may have to set some things in the BIOS. On almost modern computers, all you've got to do is say yes or no to there being a hard drive there. You don't actually have to set the type of the hard drive anymore. In the old days, you had to actually go into the BIOS and tell it what type hard drive it was. And there were 40 or 50 standard numbers that hard drives fit. So there was a number on the top of your old hard drive, and you had to make that match up so the BIOS would know how to write stuff to the hard drive or how to read it. With SATA, the big thing is, just enable the host adapter. If you've got mixed systems, if you've got a computer that's got an IDE drive and a SATA drive, you sometimes have to set the boot priority. So what drive is going to be your boot drive, and you got to make sure it's the right one. Here they're showing just installation of a SATA drive. In fact, you know what? That may actually be the inside of one of these Dells, because they do have six SATA ports on them. Here they're showing how to plug it in. and go in there and turn it on or off. That's also where you turn on the RAID functions. We're going to talk about RAID in just a second. So RAID is a redundant array of independent disks. And there are several types of RAID, but the ones that you need to be most familiar with are 0, 1, and 5. RAID 0 is not redundant, but it's good for performance. I may have told y'all, I've told other classes, I had a RAID 0 array in my machine at home, and it very recently crapped out on me. One of my hard drives died, and I lost my RAID array. But I had a backup of the stuff that was most important to me, so it was more of a pain than anything else for me to rebuild my computer. 0 is not redundant, but 0 is fast. The reason you strike two drives together in 0 is because data can then go out either of the drives to be written or read from. So it makes it a little faster. RAID 1 is mirroring or duplexing. And in RAID 1, you have two drives that are exactly the same size, and everything that's written to one is written to the other one. In a server installation, you typically use RAID 1 for the operating system drive. You typically mirror your operating system, like whatever you've got your Windows Server installed on. Then RAID 5.
You would RAID something on like a server mostly.
Usually on a server, yes. 0 is probably the only RAID you would ever use at home. I mean, unless you've got a server you wanted to put data on that was really important.
But if you lose one, you lose both pretty much for RAID 0.
But
Yes.
basically with RAID 0, you just plug another hard drive in.
You can't rebuild it because half the information's gone. And that's exactly what happened to me. One of those two drives went out.
Unless you byte by byte.
Even then you couldn't, because half of it's on one drive and half on the other. 0, actually, there's a thing called mean time between failures. And 0 actually halves the time before a failure, because you now have two drives that have failure times that have to be multiplied together. One, if you lose one drive, the other one keeps running. Then the most common of all of these is RAID 5. And in a RAID 5 array, you have one drive that is set for redundancy, and that's called the parity drive. And you need a minimum of 3 drives for RAID 5 to work. And what happens is if one drive dies, all data is written to at least 2 of the drives at one time. So when one dies, the data that was on that one dead drive can always be replaced using the parity to figure out from the other ones where that information is on them. So in RAID 5, when you have a drive die, you pull out your old one, you put a new one in, and then you do what's called rebuilding the array. And the array is rebuilt from the data on the other drives to make it where it is all redundant again.
Okay, so 2 drives are used for like RAID 0, and one drive is both of them at the same time.
Do what now?
It's like you have 2 drives that are making it faster, and then you have one that it's saving everything to.
For 0, no.
Or for 5.
For 5, everything is written to at least 2 of the 3 drives in the array.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter which 2. It reads twice as fast because it can be read from 2 places at once. But it's always written to 2 drives at one time. And you lose one drive size to make the array redundant. If I have 3 20 gig hard drives in a RAID array, my maximum storage amount is 40 gigs, because one 20 gig drive has to be dedicated to parity. If I have 4 20 gig drives, my maximum storage is 60 gigs. I still just have to have one drive. It is important to know this because I got a question on my test where they gave me the sizes of some drives and said, what's the maximum size of the RAID array, of the RAID 5 array? And the trick they played on me on the question was, it was 3 20 gig hard drives and one 50 gig hard drive. Well, RAID always has to use the smallest drive. Even though one drive was 50, only 20 of that 50 gig drive is usable. Let me tell you how that comes into play. Like we have RAID arrays over at LSUS. There's some at Bipsy. We had one that had some drives go out in it, and it was 90 gig drives, and Dell actually didn't make 90 gig drives in that size anymore. Dell sent us a 200 gig drive replacement. Works fine. The RAID array was rebuilt, but only 90 of that 200 gig drive is used. The rest of it might as well not even be there, because it's always going to use your smallest number when you build a RAID array. RAID 5 is fast though, and you only lose one drive no matter how big it is. You can make a 20 gig RAID array, a 20 drive RAID array, and you only lose one drive. And all information can always be rewritten because it's always on two other drives.
And the more drives you have, the faster it goes?
No. It's just more storage space you get, because it still is only going to be written to two at one time. And then RAID 10, you need 4 drives, and it is better than RAID 0. It gives the better redundancy than 0, but the performance of 1. So in RAID 10, you have 2 drives that are 2 sets of RAID 0s that are mirrored to each other. And there are other ones that we won't get into, but if you were to take a storage class, you can do some crazy things. You can do a 15 array, where you have 2 RAID 5s that are mirrored to each other. Or you can do a 1510 where you have 2 RAID arrays that are striped on 2 RAID 0 arrays that are mirrored to each other. So it's crazy the things you can do with the different RAID arrays. If you have money. The key is if you have money. The more redundancy you add, the more you spend on it. But 0, 1, and 5 are by far the common ones. And in a good production server where money allows, pretty much a standard setup that most people in the industry use is a RAID 1 array on 2 drives that is the operating system. And then a RAID 5 array on 3 or more drives that's the data, where you write all the data for the system. So you've got to have a motherboard that accepts RAID, or you've got to have a RAID controller card you add to it. Here they're given the example I just give about RAID 5. A RAID drive is treated as a single drive after it's configured. See here they say if there are 3 drives, 40, 60, and 60, the storage capacity is still 3 times 40. Alright, so with IDE drives, you can sometimes change what's called the transfer mode to get faster results from the drive. And they have what's called DMA, and DMA is a way that you can bypass the CPU, so data from the drive is transferred directly into the RAM of the computer. And it says on here that most of these performance enhancements are done automatically. The BIOS of the OS, if it can handle this, is normally going to turn that on for you. IDE drives, though, for the most part, are going away. Now, SATA drives have taken over. You can probably still buy a computer with an IDE drive in it, but I haven't seen one.
Why would you?
Why would you is the question at this point, because SATA is actually cheaper. You probably couldn't buy a brand new one with IDE in it. They're still going to have IDE on the controller card for you to use, but you know, you're probably not going to use it for anything. Exactly. In my machine at home, I've got SATA drives, but I had just bought a dual layer DVD-RW not too long ago that was IDE. I don't write a whole lot of stuff to it. I didn't need it to be any faster than it is, so I'm still using that old IDE writer in my computer. Because ribbons and jumpers are fun, that's why. I mean, who needs airflow anyway? Alright, so optical drives, CD-ROMs, storage between 650 and 870 megs. A CD-R means you can record to it once. RW means twice. Never took off, but you see them every once in a while, mini discs. The small ones, those were 185 to 210. I have some mini DVDs that you could write, I think, 1.5 gigs to. DVDs, now this is an example of why we need standards and why sometimes the computing industry sucks. We have 2 standards of DVDs because Sony and the other big company, who was it? Does anybody remember? Maybe it was. Sony and Panasonic wouldn't agree. So one said, we're going to use the DVD Plus model. This is great. We're going to go this way. The other company said, no, we're going to do the minus model. And drives got made. Some used one, some used the other. You needed different media for the two different types of drives. So that's why there's a plus RW and a minus RW in the DVD writing. Now, most drives do both. But you know, if you had an older drive that only did plus, you had to buy plus media. All that would work in it. If you had a minus, you had to buy minus media.
You had the same problem with the VHS.
Yes. That is another example of how standards don't always work out the way they should.
I may be thinking about HD DVD and Blu-ray though, 'cause
Well,
was
that
That's another one that they fight over. Yeah,
Well,
HD
now
DVD
it's
and Blu-ray.
gone away pretty
well, HD DVDs have pretty much.
Yeah, I haven't seen one in a while.
Well, and I think the reason that those finally quit is because the PS3s
Yeah.
chose
It was there for a while. I think the Xbox was possibly going to get HD.
They
but
were.
Right.
They never got. They
Then,
never.
but they never did it. So.
You know, back to VHS and Beta.
Yeah.
VHS won that battle.
Yeah, they did.
VHS was not the best technology. There was better picture quality off of Betamax.
Yeah, I had both.
but VCR could hold more.
Well, the story that I always heard was not just cheaper, but Sony got with the movie companies and convinced them to release the movies on VHS, and that pretty much killed Betamax.
But
right.
I was actually watching it on the History Channel, and it could hold like twice as much video. Or okay, maybe not twice as much, but it is significant.
Just had more tape.
A significantly
More tape.
Significant.
I
I can't say that word.
I grew up watching both. Like my mom had.
You had a
she-
baby. Yeah.
We had a VCR, and I remember it was the coolest thing. We had an on-screen VCR, you know, and you could set it to record things like
Yeah, we had that.
days in advance, and I don't know what my parents paid for that. They probably paid $800 or $900 for that, you know, that VHS player to do that with.
Our first VCR, my mom and dad, I remember it cost them a little over $700 something, but it was the one that you could actually record. You could play the movie, and then, you know, it had all your, like your tracking buttons, not
Mhm.
tracking, but it had a big panel, and you could daisy it into another VCR
Yep,
and
we had
record
the
and
same
play.
thing.
Right.
And that's how we did the beta. We was recording it from the VHS to the beta.
Mhm.
So data is written to CDs and DVDs using a laser light. The dual layer ones, which they don't talk about here, just use two different colored lights. There are things that are called pits, and lands are the spaces between the pits on a DVD or a CD. And a binary one is the change from a pit to a land or a land to a pit. So that's your up and down, basically, on how things are recorded on there. So installing them, you know, they might be IDE or SATA interfaces. External ones are typically USB 2. Now we're going to start seeing USB 3 stuff. There was a drive for a little while to make external SATA connectors. I don't have anything that's external SATA, but my computer at home actually does have one external SATA port.
Really?
That's cool.
Yeah, quite a few of them do.
Never seen that.
It's in the front, like it's in the front on mine. Over on the side where my two front USB ports are, there's a SATA and a FireWire right there under it.
Well, with the SATA, can you? I guess you could.
Is it eSATA? Is it the eSATA?
Um,
Or is it just regular?
It's just mine. I think it's just maybe an
What
eSATA.
did you plug in with that? I mean, besides a hard drive.
Hard drive was the thing. You know, that's when they were starting just to do external hard drives.
Okay.
And you had to power it from the wall. You had to have a wall
Yeah.
brick.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's what really kept USB in business, is that USB provides power.
yeah.
If the SATA standard, I think, had power and data on the same cable, that would have picked off. Because that SATA is a lot faster than USB 2. But USB 3, it's right neck and neck with, so that made a big difference. And for me, like when it comes to a portable hard drive, I love the convenience of not needing anything but the drive.
Yes.
Those little ones that I've got now that we got like in the library and we use as faculty, you don't need power, you just plug it in and it goes. So most are plug and play. You may only need drivers for something specific. The only driver I needed for my CD-ROM, mine's a LightScribe. And LightScribe is a technology where after you write data to it, you turn the disk over, and you can use the laser to etch the label on the other side of the disk. So that's the only thing I needed the driver for, was to make, because it makes it into a printer basically up.
You just lost me.
Man, that's cool though. I never even seen that.
I don't think it
My
really
laptop actually.
took off too
Oh,
much.
it didn't take
Well,
off.
because the thing is you have to buy certain CDs.
Yeah, you gotta buy certain.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, you have to have
I
the
think you're
CDs
pretty
that'll support it.
limited.
Yeah, because it's only one cut. It's like only one
Yeah.
color.
You know how that is. Anytime you try to corner something,
Yeah.
Did it let y'all back on?
Yeah.
All right, it let my people back home on. So
I like options.
Yeah.
I like the LightScribe stuff because you don't have to worry about writing on it.
I know.
On the other side, those discs are more expensive, and a permanent marker's real cheap from Dollar Tree, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, it crashed
Died
again.
again.
What are you
If
doing?
you're gonna send somebody something, you can put a picture on it.
Yeah.
You can, like, that's where they came in. People would, like, say you're a photographer, you do everybody's wedding pictures. Well, you put a picture of them on their disc, and it's something for them to keep.
I
And
used to have to do that with this other with the software and the labeling stuff.
Oh, yeah,
I
make a
had to do
label.
it because I did that stuff.
With music,
and see, those labels, the problem was if you didn't get them on there perfect, you had a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah, because that thing that you press down, and that thing is not work. That little-
Right. And as these discs
Yeah.
spin faster, if you had that label off a little bit,
Yep.
you could,
Yeah.
you know, we've gotten up to where we've got drives that are like, 32 and 48x speeds. That's fast enough that if that sucker came open, that disc could probably hurt you. So other limitations may prevent playback on other than one machine. Okay, y'all got audio now? I just turned it back on.
Yeah, no, I heard something.
Okay. All right, let's see if we can't get through the rest of this. All right, on CDs and DVDs, you may have an option on what type of file system you're going to use. Windows supports something called a live file system. And a live file system lets you act like a CD is actually just another disk drive. You can just copy files to and from it on a read-writable media. The problem with live file systems is they need a computer to be supported. Lots of people now have cars that have like DVD players, or like my car, you can write a CD or a DVD with MP3s on it and play it in the car. The live file system, the file system's never closed. Most of those devices can't read it. If I'm going to write one for the car, I have to write it in what's called mastered mode. And in mastered mode, you can't have a file that's larger than 2 gigabytes in size. And the reason for that, this test isn't going to get into it, but it's the ISO 9960 or 9660 standard on how files are written to disk. There's a 2 gigabyte file limit to follow that standard. And it's kind of failover from that standard being a variation of FAT32, FAT16. So,
But for most music stuff, it ain't a big deal.
right, exactly. It's
So-
not that big a deal.
So FAT32 would be the reason that I couldn't put a movie that's greater than 3 point whatever. on the
3.2
flash
gigs,
drive.
Exactly. That's why you format it NTFS and it'll work.
I will have to remember because
That'll do it.
There was
All right, so removable storage is going to be USB. There are other types. You're not going to see them unless you're dealing with a Mac. You're not going to have any of these other ones, or SCSI. You probably will never see one of those. Parallel port removable storage is gone. Tape drives, you have native and then compressed. They usually use SCSI interfaces. This was very true until recently. Those tape robot units that I was telling you about, we've got at LSUS, they're SCSI interface. But now all of the new tape stuff is SATA, because SATA is just as fast, if not faster, than any of these other ones. So that is, replacing all of these other ones. And then flash memory, your different drives, there's all different kinds and types of those. Here they're showing some of the flash media, and it's got a picture of a penny in it for comparison. These are used by different types of cameras and all. There's not a true standard on them other than the sizes for the different ones. And it's not uncommon now for if you're going to build a computer, you can put a drive in place of your floppy that's got a flash memory reader, and it'll have some of these different ones.
Read all of them.
That micro SD flash that says 2 gigs.
Yeah,
I've got one in here that's 16.
right. Yeah, I've got one in my phone that's 16. How about this 128 meg XD picture card?
Yeah.
So that's something y'all can consider. Remember, your final project in here is to build a computer. You got $2,500 to do it in. You should be able to build a great
So
machine.
it's in the Blackboard.
Yeah, it is in Blackboard. Y'all can go ahead and start on that whenever you want to. It's actually going to be, it's due next Thursday.
It's due next Thursday?
But it's in Blackboard, and next Thursday, assuming we get through, if we don't finish the slides, we'll do the slides and then I'll let y'all present. If we do finish the slides like I'm hoping, then y'all will just come in and we'll do questions, and I'll have y'all present your computer that you built. For the final, you want any specific type of build? No. You got 2,500. Build the gaming machine you want.
What if you don't game?
If you don't game, build whatever you would do with a machine.
Take over the world.
Build your take over the world machine. Build your Pinky and the Brain machine.
Well, see, you gotta have good video cards to do that.
Yeah, you do need a good video
Build
card.
one and get a graphic that goes on the sign that's a picture of Brain's head.
Right. So y'all have got lots of options on this final project. And the reason I make y'all do this project is I want you to kind of put together the things we've talked about processors and memory. I'm not going to check it based off of what you bought. Like, this is going to be your machine. If you had 2,500, what would you build? I'm going to check it to make sure you bought things that work. Did you buy an Intel motherboard? If you did you get an Intel chip? Because if you got an AMD chip and an Intel motherboard, your machine ain't going to work. Did you put a hard drive in it? I had somebody built a great machine at the class at Bipsy one day and forgot to put a hard drive in it. And you know, those are easy things to forget if you've never done this. So it's just to make you think about, did you get everything you need to actually make a computer work? And I'm giving y'all enough money, you know, fictitious money. I wish it were real. We'd all have nice machines. That you can do if you want to play around with FireWire. Get a couple of video cards. $2,500 is plenty for you to do a FireWire. I mean not FireWire.
I know.
SLI or Crossfire.
Crossfire. Thank you. Why am I thinking FireWire? There's too many fires in this.
It's Crossfire.
Yeah, you could do a Crossfire one.
NVIDIA is SLI. They use SLI.
Do we have to include the price of the OS? No, because y'all are students, so you can get an OS for free. I will check to see that you mention an OS, because what good would a computer be without it? But if you chose, yes, I'm going to put Ubuntu on it, or I'm going to go to the bookstore at Bipsy and buy Windows 8 for $9. Whatever, you know, that's fine.
Wait, can we actually for $9?
Yeah, it's $9
They
at the
don't have
bookstore.
it yet.
They don't have it yet, but they will in the next few days.
Can you get stuff like
Oh,
you have
I'm
to
still
have
gonna do
an I mean, I don't have an ID card.
So I get the new Windows
I've
8
got my
$9.
number on my enrollment sheet.
I think that's all you would need is that number.
Okay.
You should be able to do it. If they give you any flack, take that number and go to the student union and pay $5 to get an ID card.
Do you,
It's still a heck of a lot cheaper than getting Windows
do they
8.
keep track of how many you buy?
I got a-
$14 total.
They don't.
You just paid for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's either 9 or 19. I'll double check it and let y'all know. I believe it's $9.
How was the,
Ours is $6.
how was it structured, like, in terms of putting the PC together? Like, how do you
Mine
have it
says
structured in there?
Yeah, or business.
I just, it says you have $2,500. Go to one of the websites and build a computer.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
What you're gonna provide is documentation when you build this.
Print it out?
Print it, or you know, do a screen capture and show me the parts you put.
Oh, okay.
And then in the discussion in class, I'm gonna have y'all tell me what you picked and why you picked it.
Okay.
In the online version of this class, what I make them do is make a presentation. I make them write it up. You pick this piece, okay, why? What are you wanting it to do over others? But since we're all going to be together here, I'm going to have y'all just present it. And you guys at home, those of you without microphones, y'all will just have to kind of type out little pieces of yours as you've done it and tell me why you picked what you had. I'm hoping most of you have a microphone, though, so you'll be able to tell me what you got.
If you don't copy and paste.
Right.
Write it up before.
Yeah, if you don't,
copy
write
and
it up and then copy and paste it.
paste.
When are they worth having?
I actually played with
If
it
he has
today a little
Vista,
bit.
I would say, yeah.
If you have Vista, it's worth
I
having.
played with it a little bit. A guy had the feature or the trial thing of it.
It is very different.
I could see getting used to it, but it would take me some time. There are some cool features about it, and there are some that would just aggravate the crap out of me for a while.
So other types of storage, network attached storage, which is that is usually a device. Most of the time, it's actually a little Linux computer that's built into one unit, and it hooks to your network, and you store things to it over your network. It doesn't hook directly to the computer. It hooks up via your network connection. That's what I had at the juvenile court, and that was my backup solution. I had two of them. One was in my server room, and one was in the other building, the annex of the juvenile court. And my theory behind that backup method was hopefully both buildings wouldn't burn down at the same time. And since it was a local network there and I had a piece of fiber running between the two buildings, I just mirrored the drives. If something went to one, it wrote it to the other one.
What's your theory about, really about online backup? Is that enough, or do you think you need to have something hard at the...
I think if you're backing it up to a site online, you're fine. Because most of those things are redundant ridiculously. Carbonite's a good one. Carbonite's got two ISPs that run their system, and their cloud storage, they're like 8 different places. I don't think they're going to lose the data.
I know the
If
Crash
they
Plan has, Google is one of their clients.
Right. If you do lose it, here's the thing. You've also got to think probabilities. What's the probability that your computer is going to go down the same time theirs does? Yes, maybe they lost your data. They sent you something. We're sorry, please reback it up. Okay, do it immediately and you'll be fine. Okay, the other type of remote storage is a storage area network, or a SAN system. This is your very large... This is your very large system. It's usually a whole rack by itself of storage. And in that thing would be lots and lots of hard drives. And those connect to your servers via what's called a SAN network. It's special fiber optic cards. And this is for your very high-end, very highly redundant systems. And the way you set these up is there's 2 of absolutely everything in them, so that you have true redundancy. We had one of these that we got with a grant over at LSUS, and it had our Exchange servers on it. And the way that it worked, each of the servers that connected to it, each had 2 fiber optic SAN cards in them. Each fiber optic SAN card has 2 wires running from it. Each of those 2 wires runs to 2 separate controller cards in the SAN. Those 2 controller cards run to 2 separate CPUs in the SAN. Those separate CPUs then run down to the stack of hard drives. So you could lose a card, a wire, a controller card, and a CPU all at the same time, and the system would still be functional. So that's where you get into your really big, really redundant arrays. Those are the things that places like Google and these other places make. Hitachi has just moved into the Cyber Innovation Center. That's what they do. They do this big cloud storage on SAN units. In fact, one of their big customers is Netflix. And Netflix uses a tremendous amount of storage space. So they build these units that are cloud storage for Netflix. Are there load balances? It's according to how you set it up. Usually you set up a SAN to be load balanced, yes, so that it can write to everything to speed it up, but it can just use one if everything goes down. So problems that you run into with storage, the power cable, make sure you got it plugged in right. The data cable, those SATA cables especially, they're easy to come unplugged. If you've opened your machine and you're working on it, this has happened to me. I've opened it up, I've done something, I put it together, the hard drive doesn't come on. Got to take the whole thing back apart, and I realized that I had knocked the cable loose a little bit when I was putting whatever it was I was doing in the computer. If it's IDE, make sure you've got the primary master or secondary slave switch set. make sure you turn it on in the BIOS. If you've added a new SATA drive, make sure you turn SATA on in your BIOS. And then drives do actually go bad. They are physical parts that move. Sometimes there can be a head misalignment. The mechanism can jam. If you've had a laptop and you've accidentally dropped it while it's running, that drive head can hit it and it'll start screwing it up. Or the drive motor can fail and the drive won't speed up. With CD drives, make sure that it's compatible media. You know, if you have a CDR drive, you can't use RW in it. If it's a DVD, make sure that you pick the right plus or minus, unless your drive does both. Sometimes you might have written something wrong to it. Rewritable media can be very particular about format. DVDs are especially difficult across platforms. The writable media can be damaged by sunlight. RW in particular, if you leave it out in a hot car, we live in Louisiana, you can damage it. Two ways to damage it. One might be that you actually, you know, melt it and warp it a little bit so the drive can't read it, or you can actually damage where it's written. Other problems, the program doesn't detect the drive. The program doesn't list the drive as a target for writing. It detects it but displays an error message. Double check the cable connections. Update the drivers. See if you need third-party software. Verify that it's supported. So that is a rundown of Chapter 12. Do y'all have any questions? What about you guys at home? Any questions? Okay. So we finished 10, 11, and 12, and we are out of time. But I want to make sure that we are able to, you know, go ahead and finish and not be behind totally. I'm going to do Chapter 13 tomorrow for y'all and post it on Blackboard under the recorded lectures. Then on Tuesday, you know, we agreed we're going to do it from home. I'll start our very first lesson Tuesday by asking y'all to make sure you've watched 13 and do you have any questions on pieces of 13. So that's not going to be optional. It's going to be mandatory that y'all watch Chapter 13 before we meet again on Tuesday. You know, with me actually just doing the lecture at home, not answering questions and talking like I like to do, it probably won't be but about a 30 or 40 minute file for y'all to watch. And then, again, remind me, we'll start back up and we'll start on 14, but I'll ask if there were any questions on 13. That way we can stay on track, because I really want to try to either have to only do one chapter on the 8th or not do any, so y'all can bring any questions you have and we can let you present all your projects. One of my favorite parts of this class actually is to see what y'all come up with on computer builds. I know it makes me a real big geek at heart, but it's a lot of fun to see what different people build and why they build them. And $2,500 is enough money to build a good machine.
Can we use the case that we already have?
Yeah, if you want to use a case that you have.
I got my hands on a old like IBM, like that actually still has the key slot on the front. I actually want to make like where you actually have to put the key in and and they would
Yeah,
actually,
crank
like,
it. Yeah, you're going to have to probably get a new power supply for it.
Oh, I trust me. I gutted the thing. I know what I need.
Yeah.
For it.
That'll be another thing I'll check, is to make sure y'all do your...
We're bringing, do we?
No.
Do what now?
No,
This is a project I actually want to do.
Yeah, if y'all want to spend $2,500, you can bring your computer. Yeah, take a picture of that IBM case. I want to see that. That'd be fun.
Trust me, I've already gutted
Okay,
it.
yes, we are going to meet Tuesday, but what we decided, for those of you at home, I asked the class here, it's actually a holiday for them out here because it's election day. So we're all going to do it from home. We're still going to do TeamViewer like y'all are doing, but all my people that are here in class are going to be on TeamViewer as well. That way those that, you know, want to go vote and whatnot will be able to meet. So we're still going to meet, but it's just going to be everybody online instead of just you guys online. So, all right, I will see everybody on Tuesday, and y'all can watch Chapter 13 either tomorrow. I'm probably going to go home and do it now, but I'll have it up for y'all to watch tomorrow.
And you're going to send out the other stuff.
Yeah, I'll send out codes on Monday unless I can get them early. If I can get them tomorrow, I'll go ahead and send them to y'all tomorrow because I want everybody to go ahead and register as soon as you can. At least part one. How many of y'all have taken a cert before? So three of y'all in here, y'all have already got part one done. But you know, it takes sometimes a little while. I want everybody else to do part one so that they can get ready to get their actual test schedule.
I don't know what the hell I'm doing building a computer.